Hello, Jose.
Hello, Jay. Now I can hear you.
Yes,
How are you, man?
I'm well.
Camp is looking good today.
Yeah. I wish I was there.
This is the magic of Zoom.
Exactly. Okay. Just testing the screen share. Okay. If you hear a knock at the door, it'll be.
That's fine.
Uh, okay. Stop that.
And I may have to, oh no, actually, I will have to leave early as I have a deployment starting at 8 today. So I need to be online about 15 minutes early.
Okay.
But whatever I miss, I'll catch up on YouTube. It will be on
Cool.
YouTube, right?
It will be on YouTube. Yes, it will. Hey, Gary.
Hey Jay, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Staying alive.
Nice. We like
Most
to
we
hear
can all
that.
do, right?
And then we have Cayman Runner, who I don't quite know who that is, but welcome. Cool, we'll start in just a moment. So I need to. I'm juggling multiple things here. Okay. Let's.
Hello, Randy.
Hello. You called me out. Sorry I didn't come get the pizza.
There's pizza?
Right here.
Yeah, Jose said he was buying pizza.
Yeah, we were supposed to meet at camp today where there was going to be pizza. I was not expecting beer, but that's fine. And since we are meeting virtually, then I had pizza and beer on this side.
Very nice.
Uh-oh. I have difficulties with my live streaming. So
It says live on YouTube on the top of the screen.
yeah, unfortunately it's not showing up on my feed over here.
Jay, I pulled it up. I can see it.
So you can see it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we're good.
It says live on YouTube.
Yeah, but does it show this?
Yeah, I'm logged in. I can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let's see if everybody could mute unless you're talking. That would be great. And okay, welcome to the Desert Blockchain monthly session. Thank you, Jose. And it is Wednesday, October 28th, 2020. And this is our monthly session, which happens on the fourth Wednesday of every month. with the exception of November and December, when it's going to happen on the third Wednesday of the month because of the holidays. And tonight we're going to be talking about, the title is Halloween, Blockchain, and IoT, or the Internet of Things. But basically, we're going to focus on a look back over the last 12 years, because this coming Saturday, Halloween, is the birthday, the 12th anniversary of the publication of the Bitcoin white paper. And so let me go ahead and get started. I've got a brief presentation, and then we'll open it up to conversation and so forth, so that we can have a little talk about where have we been, where are we at, and where we might be going. So let me screen share. And if you can't see this, please let me know, somebody, but you ought to be able to see it right now. And so these are the topics for tonight. Basically, the intention of the session is to have a conversation about this thing we call blockchain, which is actually, in my view, sort of mislabeled by the term blockchain and should actually be about decentralization. And we'll talk about the Bitcoin white paper, a little bit about Ethereum, a little bit about Filecoin and IPFS, because I see these three projects or initiatives as capturing the fundamental elements of decentralization. We'll talk a little bit about trust, and by trust, I'd like to open it up a little bit and talk about where do we stand today with centralized trust, and what are the pros and cons of decentralized trust. We'll talk about what's working, what's missing, some of the IoT possibilities and how IoT fits into this. We'll talk about decentralized software, decentralized hardware, centralized institutions exploring decentralized innovation. And primarily that can be captured, I think, in the central bank digital currency initiatives that are happening all over the world. And we'll talk about opportunities and then conclusion. So to start it off, the creator of the Bitcoin white paper, which again, the anniversary of that is this October 31st. It was published on October 31st of 2008. And the publisher is someone by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, we don't know if that's a real name or a pseudonym, or we don't really know who that person is. And I think that's extremely interesting, not only for the innovation that was associated with the Bitcoin white paper and the whole structuring of Bitcoin, but also this person or group of people, their conscious decision to remain synonymous, or at this point actually anonymous, and to launch this project that has completely taken on a life of its own. So we can talk about that a little bit later as well. But this is the Wikipedia page regarding Bitcoin. And it talks about, basically, it was invented in 2008 by an unknown person or group of people. And it was actually, after the white paper was launched, it became sort of a small but growing and very talented community that started to work on this and create this. So, and by the way, the constructs in Bitcoin and the Bitcoin white paper, to the best of my knowledge, are things that other people had already sort of invented, been working on, but the Bitcoin white paper and the structure and the governance and some of the terms and conditions of the white paper basically was the right mix at the right time to launch something that became incredibly successful. And here's a little bit about the history of Bitcoin, the ups and downs, and something that basically had a value of 0 in, late 2008 is now worth, I believe, about $245 billion. And we'll take a look at that on CoinMarketCap in a moment here. This is the Bitcoin white paper. It's about 9 pages, and it's well written. Interestingly enough, the Bitcoin white paper, and again, check me if I'm and correct me if I'm wrong, the Bitcoin white paper that was the essence and the trigger, the spark of what we call blockchain, does not use the term blockchain within it. And, I think that's quite phenomenal. Another little dimension of this whole phenomenon we call blockchain, or I prefer to call decentralization. And here is a snapshot of the coin market cap. Yesterday, Bitcoin was trading at $13,780 US dollars. And I can't quite read the total market cap. Well, here's the total market cap, $255 billion. So excuse me while I take a drink. Quite phenomenal. So those are basically the some of the elements that set the stage for what we can talk about tonight. I'm going to go back to the topics, and I might refer to this from time to time. But I'll open it up to conversation and questions. At this point, I have some things that I will emphasize, but any questions or comments on the 12th anniversary of the publication of the Bitcoin white paper? And I'm also want to track YouTube, because if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to type questions and comments in the chat, and we will follow that and address those. So let me go back to my outline. I'm not going to show the outline at this point, but let me take a few of the other topics that I mentioned in the outline. So I mentioned 3 projects. Excuse me. Hang on just a second.
Jay, your background is looking weird.
I see that. Sorry about that. There we go. So I mentioned 3 projects. Number 1 is Bitcoin. And we'll talk a little bit about the significance of Bitcoin, basically what that unleashed, and the computer science problem that Bitcoin solved. Number 2, we'll talk about, excuse me, Ethereum, which was basically launched around 2015, and the computer science problem that project solved and why that's significant. And then we'll talk a little bit about Filecoin, which was recently released, which serves a particular niche and some of the computer science problems that whole ecosystem solves. So in terms of Bitcoin, what that solved is decentralized consensus. So when we have centralized constructs, centralized server, database, whatever, there is some ruling party that basically has the ultimate say in terms of what is so. The Bitcoin project and white paper launched a decentralized construct where there's basically nobody in charge, but everybody's able to reach consensus because of this. They look at what is the longest chain that's out there, and that longest chain becomes the authoritative source of truth. And if another chain is discovered that's longer than that, because it's used more energy to create, then that chain will override all the others that are out there. That's a phenomenal innovation that was successfully put together that basically solved this consensus problem that had been unsolved basically in computer science up until this point. So that's Bitcoin. Number two is Ethereum. And Ethereum solved what's called the halting problem, or creating an infinite loop. And basically, it allowed decentralized computation without the restrictions in the computation that Bitcoin has and that Bitcoin put into its ecosystem by design. So consensus for Bitcoin, computation for Ethereum, and the third is Filecoin, which it looks like it's going to successfully solve the storage problem of data in a decentralized fashion. And although Filecoin just launched their main net on October 15th, we'll have to kind of wait and see how successful that is. But so far, approximately 2 weeks into it, it looks like there hasn't been an obvious flaw that somebody could exploit, because the market capitalization of Filecoin is about $750 million. So that's a pretty big bounty to put out there. So there are other decentralized storage projects out there. It's just that in the other innovation that Filecoin solves is using a different type of consensus algorithm other than proof of work. And that's really, really important. They use something called proof of space-time, proof that you're actually storing something for a given period of time. So we won't go into the details of all that. I'll pause there and ask if there's any questions or comments regarding picking those three projects, those 3 points, milestones, I would say, of innovation. And, I don't want to slight the other projects out there. There's hundreds and thousands of other projects, and they're all interesting, but I'm just picking these 3 to kind of highlight consensus, computation, and then storage. And of course, all 3 of these projects also have the component of value. So they're all a store of value, a way to exchange value, and a way to pay for services, including file storage in a decentralized manner. Okay, and I don't see any questions or comments on the YouTube channel either. So let me talk about trust a little bit. Much of the communities in the blockchain and decentralized realm have this sort of reputation that these tools, this new tool set, these new constructs are going to be alternatives to this, or excuse me, replacements for centralized economic, political, institutional constructs. So it was sort of a rebel attitude, a rebel tone when these things were introduced and as they developed. And it was kind of like, you know, centralized versus decentralized. And it was kind of, the tone was sort of like one or the other. And it was sort of like, aha, we've got this decentralized thing that you can't stop, centralized institutions, and you know, we're going to open up this whole new world. And that hasn't quite panned out. However, I would ask everybody listening to this to consider that what this decentralized ecosystem comprised of a multitude of projects has introduced is an alternative. An alternative is a better word than replacement, in my view. And that, just the existence of these decentralized alternatives has set in motion some, at least, exploration by the centralized constructs to look at this new thing. And I would say it's caused disruption. But let's circle back to the point of trust. And particularly today, Wednesday, October 28th, 2020, my opinion, Jay Carpenter, is that we are arguably on a global basis having a crisis of trust from the centralized constructs that have been the centerpiece for our socioeconomic interactions up until this point in human history. We have questions about trusting our electoral process. We have questions of trust surrounding the data, and even the data that's couched as scientific data is not only being questioned, but it's also becoming a major determinant of how we behave and what we can do and what we can't do. And there's other elements of trust that I'm sure all of us could cite, but this alternative of decentralized, cryptographically secured constructs, I assert, is introducing something that is a new realm of trust, where collectively we can audit and prove to ourselves what is objectively so and what isn't so, versus much of any degree of subjectivity. And I think that's a really, really important factor that we're looking at today. And one of the dimensions that makes these decentralized constructs become relevant, critical, and important. So I'll pause it at this point and again ask if there's any questions or comments anybody would like to discuss about that. Okay, and feel free to unmute and interrupt me at any time if you've got a comment. Um,
Can I ask a question, Jay?
sure.
So, we have our election coming up next week. I mean, and there's a lot of lack of trust, all these lawsuits about, counting ballots and everything. We're probably going to have a lot more maybe after the election. What can this technology do in that area? Do you think we can have a more trustworthy and reliable voting system going forward using these type of technologies? Because we certainly seem to need one. We've got a lot of distrust with the current system.
I absolutely do. And one of the things that is, I think, most exciting about the possibility of having a more trusted voting process is something called zero knowledge proofs. And I've got a demonstration of this, and maybe we'll have a session on this after the election. But part of our problem is that if I don't trust the election that's going to happen next week, there is no way for me to go in and audit the number of people that voted, how they voted, and basically satisfy any questions that I might have regarding the outcome of the election. In fact, it's somewhat obfuscated because of the Electoral College. And I'm not saying anything pro or con about that. I'm just saying that the level of distrust around the centralized voting process that we have, where we're turning over our trust to the process that we expect to be have integrity to it, that takes a large degree of us basically trusting the people that are counting the votes, collecting the votes, and so forth. And I think that's particularly evident in what we're seeing in this election. And I don't remember in other elections, but the emphasis on actually taking your vote before the election and taking it and delivering it. People don't even trust the mail. So the decentralized mathematically verified, cryptographically verified process, though it's still in the process of being refined and created and then possibly introduced and adopted, this process, this decentralized voting process that's being explored and innovated upon, could allow us to definitively audit the voting without revealing how people individually voted. That's really, really important. So any comments or questions about that, Gary?
No, thanks. I mean, that was sort of my my supposition too, is that the current system is clearly broken and getting more broken, and we need some kind of different approach. And this seems to be a promising way to do it. Obviously, we have to build trust in this technology too. When a lot of people don't understand it, it's going to be a process to get there. But I definitely think it's got potential.
Yep. So this is perfect because this leads to the next 2 points on the topic list, and that of what's working and what's not working. Okay, so what's working? What's working is what we just talked about, which is that this decentralized process opens up an opportunity for any one of us to go in and actually audit what the decentralized Ethereum, Bitcoin, Filecoin, or any of the other projects that are out there. We can actually go in and audit that ourselves and basically, theoretically, disappear any doubts or uncertainty about what's going on in these decentralized things. So that's definitely working, in my view. It's also working that, Bitcoin has a market capitalization, total value, if you will, of $255 billion, which constitutes basically a bounty. So if there was any flaw in the Bitcoin ecosystem, there are ways that somebody could basically earn close to $255 billion for themselves. And so every passing day that these projects stand up is sort of solidifying the validity or the strength of the constructs. So that's working. And by the way, there have been state actors that have attacked these projects. So name your country. There's a high probability that any one of those countries has taken a look at how could we defeat any one of these decentralized projects. So that's working. What's missing, and you touched upon it, Gary, is that these projects are very difficult to understand and arguably difficult to use. So the human interface of these decentralized projects is an area where we could innovate upon and improve. So the other thing that's missing is a workable way to manage decentralized identity. And that is, in my view, to take these, Bitcoin, Ethereum, you name it, to the mainstream will require a workable decentralized identity construct. And by the way, workable decentralized identity, I think, comes into play to usher in a new way to vote that is more trusted. So those are the areas that I think are still ripe for creativity and making these things more human friendly. So I'll pause with that and ask if there's any questions. Okay, so let's, the next thing that I have on the list is IoT, the Internet of Things. And, it's interesting because my smartphone, interestingly enough, the whole smartphone phenomenon, our connectivity, this supercomputer, what would have been classified as a supercomputer, 20 years ago, this supercomputer is now in everybody's pockets. And not only is it in your pocket, but it's in your car, it's in your home systems. We have this phenomenal computation capability. And here is a camera that was just introduced called a UCam. And this is using a blockchain as well as a public-private key system. And this has, a decent amount of computing power in it as well. Not as much as my smartphone, but the point of the IoT is that, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, pick your number, the hardware for computation was much more centralized itself. And now the hardware is becoming ubiquitous through all of our devices. And it's just going to continue that way. So in the last 12 years, coincidentally, with the introduction of the Bitcoin white paper, we're now seeing this rapid and powerful decentralization of computational hardware. And I think that further boosts the possibility of a shift from centralized constructs to decentralized constructs. So any comments, questions about that? The next two topics on the topic agenda are decentralized software and decentralized hardware. And this kind of goes hand in hand with this, what I just talked about in terms of the hardware proliferating and computation becoming like surrounding us. But just like progress has been made in the decentralization of hardware, we have also experienced innovation in spreading out the software. And Ethereum is one of the best examples of that, where Ethereum represents this global computation capability. But there are other methods where peer-to-peer mesh networking, the software to that continues to improve. So not only are we surrounded by hardware that's doing computation, but the software that's doing the computation on the hardware is getting better and better. And I think that opens up some really, really interesting possibilities as well. And I'm going to pause there for just a moment and talk about another phenomenon that's going on that I think is deceiving, and it's yet another dimension of this decentralization. And that is the blending of data. Let's consider that these 5 fingers represent data. Prior to the Bitcoin blockchain white paper, or the Bitcoin white paper, data was, pretty much zeros and ones, and that's it. Then when the Bitcoin white paper came along, all of a sudden, value monetization became tightly integrated with the zeros and ones, the logic, the hardware that's becoming decentralized. And most people look at that value as it's called cryptocurrency, right? So they look at it as a substitute for, the paper we carry around in our wallets or the digits in our bank account and all that sort of thing. And it is, a Bitcoin is certainly an alternative to all those things, but it's also something much deeper and much richer, which I think is kind of hard to get your arms around until you really get into this. But the value that's associated with these decentralized constructs that are public and purely decentralized, or as close to decentralized as possible, that value is an integral part of the zeros and ones now. And if you took away the $13,700 of value that's associated with a Bitcoin, I assert that the whole Bitcoin ecosystem, if it wouldn't disappear, it would be radically different than what it is today. So that integration of value, computation, data, information is not only value, but it also represents signaling. And as I alluded to a little bit earlier, that signaling is an instantaneous signal of trust, of integrity in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Because if all of a sudden we looked on the markets and Bitcoin had gone from 13,700 to, let's say, $130, everybody would instantly know that something was up. So that would be the equivalent of sending out an email to everybody saying, hey, something has happened to Bitcoin. And I think that's a really, really important factor in this whole ecosystem. Excuse me while I get back into the. So any comments, questions, or topics about that? Another, yeah, Randy.
Yeah, Jay, hope you don't mind. So I think it's interesting that you brought up the comment about the Internet of Things, because I think George Orwell is probably flabbergasted at how much is actually going to be at the fingertips of government in the scope of your refrigerator is going to tell your local grocery store that you need some milk. Your Ring video is going to record public property video surveillance that the police department can use without even a subpoena. It's already been tested in court. And that's just a couple of the small little, I mean, the phone tracks us everywhere we go. I remember about 5 years ago, and I'll keep this brief, but I was amazed that I had Google on my phone as a map. And so one time I pulled into a parking lot, and all of a sudden I saw a little blurb that said, Randy Graham just pulled into X parking lot, whatever. It was a grocery store. So I thought, man, it really is tracking me. It knows where I'm going. I'm sure somebody else just saw that message. So I'm just saying, decentralization of data is probably going to be one of the most key concepts that freedom-loving, constitutional, especially libertarians, but even if I'm not talking, I don't want to talk politics, but someone who really cares about, keeping your anonymity for just the fact that you need to have your privacy. This is one of the biggest issues that most of us haven't even thought about yet. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, Randy. And, another dimension of why this conversation is so relevant at this point in time is, we are seeing the centralized data sources, the social media companies, basically being brought in front of our policymakers with the possibility of breaking them up. And it's not only in the United States, but it's it's a concern, and it's something going on around the world. So we are actually in a collision moment between these data phenomenons that have arisen, and again, in a very short period of time. Facebook was just a thought in a dorm room in 16 years ago, in 2004. Google itself was a thought in a dorm room in 21 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago. That's in the overall scheme of things, that is amazing. Twitter was like a little hack that some developers put together just to kind of message one another. And now we are seeing, the trust around Twitter becoming an essential element of our election process, and as well as our politicians, our policymakers, and everything else. And arguably, it happened. It emerged most powerfully in the Arab Spring, where the power of social media and particularly Twitter caused a ruling and a governance revolution that a year or two prior would have been completely out of the realm of possibility. Anybody would have thought that would have happened. So I would like to say a little bit about what you're talking about, Randy, because I think we have all experienced this. I've experienced it, where and it has changed, and I think it's changed because of the reaction that people have had to this. But I get into my car and I look on my phone and it's telling me how long it's going to take for me to get to my most probable next destination, because it's tracking my schedule. Now, it was like a year or so ago, it was telling me about how great the special at Burger King was. And, it was trying to sell me to go to Burger King. And I had no interest in that, but you bring up a point. It is tracking us. This is an Orwellian, probably beyond what George Orwell could have conceived in terms of a tracking device and so forth. And, I would like to say that I personally don't think that the large social media entities have created their businesses and their business models with any kind of sinister or subversive motivation behind it. I think it's a natural consequence of the business models that they chose, and basically the tools they had at their disposal, which was the ability to gather this data. If you think about it, if I was Larry Page and Sergey Brin, or Mark Zuckerberg, or any of the others, I would want, if I could track and find out more about my customer, i.e. Jay Carpenter, I would want to do that. And it's actually something that Jay Carpenter wants, because, the other phenomenon is we are barraged with all this information, and it's actually a service to me that, Google and Facebook and so forth are sifting through all the information and serving up things that they think their best guess is that I would be interested in. So that's actually kind of a benefit to me. And, having my phone tell me how long it's going to take me to get to my next likely destination sometimes is, pretty valuable. Now, at the same time, these businesses and these entities, these enterprises that are collecting all this data, the possibility of it being used in a adversarial way to us as consumers is a real possibility. And the other thing that I don't think we've seen a lot of, but certainly looms on the horizon, is that, these entities that have grown in a short period of time, less than 20 years or less, we don't know who's going to be controlling those entities in another 5 or 10 years with all this massive amount of data that's been accumulated in tracking us. So, there are questions on the table, on the policymakers' tables, on the enterprise and innovation and entrepreneurial tables that are fundamental to pretty much everybody on the planet at this point. And I don't think anybody really has a solution to this. There is a professor from Wharton who just published a paper that won an award. And he asserts that blockchain is the, if not the only, at least the most viable solution or path forward to an alternative to these centralized data collecting constructs we call social media and some of the successful social or contemporary enterprises. And shopping services are certainly another area that's collecting a lot of data on us. So thank you for your comments, Randy. I think that's right on point. The next piece in the topic outline is centralized institutions exploring decentralized innovation. So this refers to the initiatives that are underway by the central banks, and for that matter, the traditional centralized banking entities. There was just a post today about one of the banks is launching their own coin, and they're looking for blockchain talent and so forth. But the centralized entities are now exploring the decentralized constructs. So central bank digital currencies is by everything I can determine, is a huge set of initiatives that's being explored and looked upon by pretty much every central bank that's out there. Now, some people say it's a way to eliminate cash. Some people say it's just a way for the central banks to keep up with the times, to make it more convenient to do their job of managing the money supply and so forth. I don't think we know, and I don't think they totally know. And I don't think we're going to understand the dimensions and the ramifications of all this until these things are actually launched and we see what the adoption, if any, looks like and how they're used and so forth. But suffice it to say that the centralized institutions are experimenting and exploring with these decentralized tool sets. And I don't think we'll know where that's going to go. And, obviously I'm from a generation that's been around for a while. And I saw this happen in the telecommunications realm, because in the mid 90s, when the internet was just moving from this academic and, government construct that was hard to use, that actually became user-friendly, human-friendly, when that started to take hold, everybody predicted the demise of the telecoms. That, the telephone system is going to be obsolete, and the telecoms are all going to be horse and buggies compared to the internet and so forth. Guess what? That didn't happen. In fact, the telecoms were able to adapt and actually leverage the decentralized internet, which is a completely different communications, data, computation architecture than the old copper line telephone network. They were able to adapt and actually leverage the internet to their advantage. I would say there's at least a 50% probability that the centralized institutions will start to adapt and leverage and utilize these decentralized constructs. But certainly the jury's still out on that. And that kind of brings up the last couple of points of opportunities, and then we'll kind of wrap it up from there. But You know, the opportunity set, I think, is incredibly rich here, because not only are these decentralized alternatives springing up, the public blockchains, but the private blockchains are happening, and the central bank blockchains or digital currencies, or however they're run, are starting to be introduced. So, I think there's a huge opportunity. There's a huge opportunity again to make it more human friendly, a huge opportunity in decentralized identity, and then to bring these constructs basically mainstream. And we saw this phenomenal wealth creation that happened in 2016, 2017, so 4 to 3 years ago. We've been in kind of this lull, let's say, because these innovations haven't taken place in terms of human friendly and decentralized identity. But if history is any indication of how this goes, I think we're going to see the innovation happen, the use cases that were envisioned start to become reality and fulfilled. And I think we will see some fundamental shifts in the way we interact, the way we relate, the way we transact. And I don't think anybody can say at this point in time exactly how that's going to play out. But I'll conclude with this. I am very optimistic about this, because to me, this creates a whole new realm of empowerment for the peers, the endpoints on the network. For Randy, for Gary, for Jay, for our families, for everybody. And, not only in the United States, but pretty much anywhere in the world, especially when you see the blankets of connectivity that are being rolled out in terms of satellite internet services, Starlink and such. All of a sudden, as I look out over in the next 2, 3, 5 years, I see the hardware, the software, the tool sets, the value exchange just becoming completely uniform and completely global. So we got about 5 minutes left. That's my little soapbox. Hopefully you found some interesting points out of that, and hopefully that is a fitting way to celebrate whoever wrote this 9-page paper in 2008 and published it on October 31st, Halloween of 2008. So any comments, questions, or so forth?
Just a quick comment. It was interesting to read that some of those initial Bitcoins that Satoshi Nakamoto got have recently been moved.
Really?
Yeah, most of them haven't moved since 2009, and a whole bunch of them just moved a couple of weeks ago. So
I did not know that.
So somebody is out there still and is now starting to catch in, it looks like, maybe.
Very interesting. One of the at least possible developers that could have been Satoshi Nakamoto's fellow named Hal Finney, who passed away. And I don't know that much about it, but I think it's probably somebody else. But I've kind of suspected, and I didn't know this, Gary, that some of those coins had moved. But that's very interesting, because that means in my mind, only one of two things. Either Satoshi Nakamoto is still alive and, moving some of the Bitcoins that they obtained, or somebody has basically gotten the private keys and is liquidating. And I think either possibilities interesting, because if somebody got the private keys, then they probably know who the real Satoshi Nakamoto was, if that person or group of people are no longer, alive. Very, very interesting. I had not heard that. Cool. Well, hopefully this was interesting. Again, we're going to have our next session on the third Wednesday of November, which I believe is November 18th. And we'll be announcing the topic sometime between now and then. And maybe we can do the voting. That might be interesting, especially after the election. That's a good suggestion, Gary.
I was on a master's thesis defense of a guy who did it, his master's in engineering and computer science on voting. He graduated last about a year ago now, but I think he's still around. So I could connect you with him.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you could send me his name, and I'd like to contact him. Maybe he could do a session on it. That'd be great. That'd be really cool. So, and for those of you that are watching that don't know, Gary is a professor of law at Arizona State University, Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, and Gary heads the Science and Innovation initiatives and department there. And there's a awesome conference in May called GETS, which is the Governance of Emerging Technology and Science, that Gary hosts and coordinates and so forth. And I highly recommend it. So yeah, cool. And there's other things that are, I think, fit right into the decentralized space, because policy is yet another area for innovation in this whole space. So yeah, Gary, why don't we go ahead and plan on that for voting, decentralized voting. I think that would be perfect for next month. Cool. Well, thank you very much. We have temporarily suspended the phone workshops on Thursdays. I've mentioned that in the past. That's on hold until the directory is a little more developed. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please contact me, Jay Carpenter, all spelled out, at desertblockchain.com. And I appreciate your time and attention. And let's create some cool stuff. All right.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Gary.